it works pretty well. So, okay, so what I wanted to show today is what I've been doing with Crew AI, which is an open source, though not like an open source community type, but just like open source, and then you can buy upgrade types of open source, but their code is available online. But running it yourself would be probably pretty challenging, like to run everything on your own. But it's all there, and it seems to be a pretty good framework for building multiple agent systems. So let me share my screen.
Is it recording? Good.
Okay, so this is their documentation. And so first there's the install component to it. So it's a framework that requires Python 3.10, I believe, or greater. It says somewhere in the documentation. So it is for Python, but now you can run Python in R. So if you're using R and prefer that, you could probably run this in Python inside of it and be able to get most of the benefits working. So I'm running it locally on my machine. So I first had to go in and install something called UV. So in the Python world, probably everyone's familiar with pip. UV is a more modern version of pip that allows for better package updates and dependencies and all of that. There's been quite a bit of discussion. We'll probably maybe do something in the fall on some of the new package managers, because it seems to be a pretty hot topic right now in the Python community is, do you just stick with pip or do you use one of the more modern package managers? And they do use the more modern one, so you have to install it. And then after that, then when you're in Python, obviously, then you also want to install Crew AI. So the first time I did it, I thought, oh, well, I'll start a virtual environment and I'll install Crew AI in my virtual environment, and that messed everything up. So then I uninstalled all that and read through more, actually read some of the documentation, and it says, do not create a virtual environment and install that. Install and then create your virtual environment within the framework instead. And they are correct that it does not work if you go the other way around.
Surprisingly, they're correct.
Surprisingly, they are correct. And it does work fine after you go through that step. So yeah, you would want to install it, and you could do that, of course, on your servers. And then once you have it, then you can create a virtual environment to keep like all your Python packages in that you're then to use within your agent system. So when then you create a new, what they call crew, kind of like a crew of agents, a group of agents that you're going to use, it creates the file structures for you. And this is an image of that file structure pattern. A lot of it you won't have to mess with unless you really want to get involved. But there are some files, and we'll be going through those, that you'll use primarily to create, and that's the main py file, the crew py file, and then an agent's YAML file and a task's YAML file. If you decide to add tools, you can add them in the tools section, or you can add them directly into the Python code. And I'll show an example, and I just put it right into the Python code rather than building a separate tool. You can just use a decorator and put it right into your code, which is nice. And that's about it. So install UV, install Crew AI, create a new project, and you'll get all these files in your folder. And that's pretty much ready to go. So now I'll go over to my project, my coders demo project. And let me make this small. And we'll go through kind of how you set it up and what it looks like. So I guess I will start with the crew py file. And this is a Python file, obviously, and this is where you actually tell it which of the agents and which of the tasks you want to use. So kind of the structure of their framework is you can create as many agents as you want, and you can create as many tasks as you want. And then you can combine the tasks to the agents. So you don't have to have an agent that's specifically tied to a task. In the setup one they do, which I'm just editing for some of this, and then I'm adding some of my own. So there's like a researcher and then a research analyst. And you can give like the same task to both of them if you want, knowing that they do different things with that task. So it's kind of up to you, which I thought was nice because you can break those apart and you might use the same task with multiple different agents in your pipeline in multiple different ways. So we'll go up. You have to, of course, import a lot of things from Crew AI for it to know what to do. So for the demo today, for my LLM, I'm just using Ollama, running a Llama 3.2 model locally. And so that's the code for that. If I wanted to, and I had it set up for a while to use ChatGPT Turbo 4, because I was trying to have a programmer agent that would write unique code and run that code depending on what the research analyst provides. So that way it would be dynamic, and each time it could write different code for a different type of data visualization based on the decisions it makes. It didn't work after many, many attempts, partially because like first I was trying to do with Llama 3.2, and turns out Llama 3.2 will not just give you code, it always has to put things around your code. And of course, the output, all it wanted for the engine was just the Python code. So then I was trying for Turbo, which ChatGPT told me was its best engine for, or best model for writing code that would be consistent, but it still messed up the code every time. I couldn't get it to work. I've thought about downloading like a different, like a Mistral code model that's supposed to be really good for writing code, their newest Mistral model, but I just haven't gotten around to it. It wasn't that important. I was just playing. I have no real use for this anyway, other than to learn. So I just set up at the beginning what model I'm going to be using. So one limitation I have found, and maybe there'll be a way around it, is if you're running a local model, well, you have to have the local model running. So you have to go into terminal or something and start the local model so that it's running. But that means you can only run one local model at a time. In theory, I think there may be a way around that, like using Screen or something, running multiple. But for now, I can only use the one model. So I can't run like one agent using Ollama 3.2 and another using DeepSeek on my same machine, because I can't run two models at the same time with Ollama, from what I currently understand. But you can run multiple models with multiple agents. Like I can run one agent with GPT and another agent with Ollama and another one with Claude. You can do that, but running locally, you're limited to the one locally running model. So then as you go down, you define your crew. So I'll skip over tool for now and just start with agents. So currently I have 3 agents created. So the first one is the researcher agent. And you can define the aspects of the agent here, but instead I'm going to use the YAML file. So which I have over here in the YAML. So I have the descriptions over here. So I'm just referring to those so that I can keep it better organized. Though I could do it all here in the Python file, but it would just get really cluttered after a while. So I'm just telling it to go to the agent's configuration file and pull researcher configuration. And I'm telling it then to use the LLM, which is the one I defined up above. Then my second agent is called reporting analyst. And again, it goes as to the configuration file to get my description of that. For this one, I also added a tool. And so what I had to do, it's a very simple tool, like one line of Python, is get the word count for the report that you're creating. Because I wanted to see if I could get it to work, and it does work, so, and I'll show all of this later, obviously. But you can define then which tools it uses within there, so each agent can have a set of tools that they have available. They do have a preset number of tools, so they have a list of tools that they have built in that include like browsing, code search. The code interpretation one is the one I was trying to use, where you can write code and run code all through the LLM, and that's where I had struggles. You can have DALL-E, you can do DocX things. There are a bunch of them, or you can build your own tools, obviously. So if you want to see the tool, then the tool, I just use a decorator and define it here. As I mentioned earlier, you can define more complex tools in the tools folder. But if you want something simple, you can just put it in as a decorator. And it just appends the word count to the end of the report. And all it does is a word count, and then strip it and add it in so that you can have the word count. This was my programming agent that never got to work, but it's still here. As my, you can see, I was giving it the tool, the code interpreter tool. Then below you have your tasks, and there's a research task, a reporting task, and a coding task. And then I pulled those again from YAML files, so my task configurations, which I'll show in a minute. You can also define like what they use for inputs and outputs. So the input for the reporting task is the output of the research task. And the output of the reporting task is an MD file. Yeah, and then with the coding task, yeah, it never really got working, but you would want to do the same. Like if you wanted to output whatever the code gave as a file, you would tell it to output that type of file. And you would tell it where to get its inputs for creating that.
What was the input of the research task?
Oh, the input of the research task is it will ask the user to put in what topic they want research on. So it's like an input field. So I don't have to tell it because it's part of the process. Yeah, so if I then go to the YAML file, we can look. So the researcher is whatever the topic is, senior data researcher. The goal for them is to uncover cutting edge developments in the topic. And then there's a backstory where you put in the background information for each of your agents. So again, some of this I just took straight from what they give you at the beginning, and I just edited it. So it doesn't all maybe make the most sense, but it seems to work. So then you have one for each of your agents. And so what I have figured out from this is there's a lot of fine tuning of these. Like you run it many times to get it to do the same thing consistently. So there's quite a bit of work that goes into defining these in such a way that you actually get what you want out consistently out of the LLMs. And then there's the task YAML where you have the task descriptions. Yeah,
I have a dumb,
I thought you were waving.
no.
So-
I have a dumb, probably a dumb question. Asking an LLM for cutting edge research, does that make sense? To me, it's gonna be like not time.
So it depends on your LLM and when it was built. My thinking is, and my idea behind it, if I want to go further with it, would be to then build in a Python function tool that would go to archive and pull like the last 6 months of archive and feed those in as RAG for it to use when it does it. So then it could be really like updated as of this morning, updated on the topic.
It could also probably use an internet search tool.
Yeah, it could use an internet search tool, which they have available too. Yes, there's many ways you could get it up to date.
And that's the cool thing about agents is they could like use these tools, right? That's my understanding.
Yeah, and you can, whatever you can think of, you can create a tool for, because you have all the Python as your toolkit. So you can build pretty much anything you can imagine, as long as there's data out there somewhere for it.
I have a meta question here of how close are we to just like not needing to do this at all? Because I could ask ChatGPT to use Crew AI to build a system of agents to do this task. And then it creates all these files, because this is all just plain text, right? So
Yeah.
it could architect for me a crew that's probably better than the one I could come up with, and it's got all the syntax right. It has no problems, and then I just run that. And then why even run it? Why not just have the prompt be, okay, just built in the ChatGPT, right? Like, do this thing, use Crew AI to build a crew to do it. Now go. And it just does it in the background.
In theory,
I mean, we're like.
it depends how complicated. I mean,
Right,
for
yeah.
something like this with 2 agents doing 2 fairly simple tasks, my guess is it could do that just fine.
Sure.
If you had a long pipeline, like you were trying to do, like your whole pipeline of data cleaning and analysis and outputs, it's in a mess up somewhere, and you'll
Somewhere.
never know where that is
Yeah.
because you can't see what it's doing in the background. Now, that said, though, my guess is we're gonna see more of common tasks just built into the model. So as
Yeah.
like the deep research one that
Yeah.
OpenAI has, they pretty much took the agents that did those and they trained it into the model and created a new model. Now, of course, they can afford to dump $30 million into training a new model for a task like that.
Yeah.
For a task like this, I wouldn't spend any of that.
Sure.
But I think what they're probably, I mean, they're not making enough money just off inference to allow me to do all of this and not try to compete against that. My guess is for major tasks where there's lots of
Yeah.
potential revenue, they will just build a model that will do it better than all my agents will do it anyway. And if I created something purely on agents, I'll compete against them who will do the same thing, but within the model itself.
Right.
But it's only for things where they can gain a competitive advantage on a large enough scale, because training a model is expensive.
Yeah.
But that's my understanding, that kind of what they did with that deep research is they had all the agents built, they were doing it fine, and then they trained the model just to have it all baked right into the model itself.
Obviously, there's a lot of value in being able to hand fine tune everything, right? You can set up your agents to do exactly what you want. Yeah, I'm just wondering how long this paradigm will live if we can't find a way to automate this paradigm even better, right? And like, I'm just.
Oh,
every
yeah,
time
and
I
it
see
would probably
something
have
new, it's like,
written all of this for me.
Yeah, right, I mean, that's the thing, it's like.
I use it all the time when trying to figure out why it doesn't work.
Right, yeah.
Like,
whatever-
I'm getting these error messages, I'm getting these error messages, I'm
Yeah.
getting these error.
Yeah.
It just keeps helping, but it doesn't get it right a lot of the
No,
time.
no.
I would even send it to the website with the documentation, and it would still give me the wrong code.
Yeah.
Even though it was on the website I was looking at, like how to set up the LLM, it would not tell me to put in the local URL. Even though that's what the website says to do. Finally, I just did it, copied off the website, and it worked. So there's still some issues, but I think you're right that it'll depend on the task and how much value there is in the task and whether they can capitalize on that. So research in general, they can capitalize on doing little things for JP's research isn't a much,
No.
they won't bother.
And this trade-off, probably they would all be using all OpenAI. models and wouldn't allow you to use the model.
Yeah, this is, again, just the fact that with this configuration, I can use any model I want, I can use an open source, I can use it, run it locally. I can have it for purposes where I don't want to be feeding all my data to OpenAI. So there's tons of reasons why there's a lot of value in it. I'm just thinking about the evolution of this and where does it go and how much of this gets baked into the models, how much of this can be generated by a single model that then performs better than the model itself. Like that's what I mean. Like a meta question is more that, like, can the model come up with a agent formulation that performs the task better than the model itself? That would be like kind of weird.
Mm,
Like, is that, I don't even know, if, it's like, this is like a limits of information kind of thing, like, like, is that possible? Could it do that? Even if the agent was using its own, that same model, can the combination of these agents configured in a different way perform the task better than just the model?
Probably,
Probably, and that's just kind of
Because-
crazy,
yeah.
like, that's just weird, but I think it's true, I think it probably works.
And then you could set the model off on creating thousands of these to improve itself in
Right.
all areas.
Right?
And a
So,
year
like,
later, it
Yeah.
will be.
this is like the
better.
takeoff moment where like things just start to self-improve, it'd be really cool.
I have been reading about their new model they released this week, the 03.30. It sounds amazing. It's
OpenAI,
OpenAI's next
why do
version.
they keep changing where the O is in the name?
I don't
Why,
know.
why can't we just use like a 1.2, 1.3? I'm so confused.
This, yeah, this, I read some articles about that, and they said once, like, for the next one, the next big one, they're gonna start, like, making that more consistent. But we'll see how it
So-
goes.
Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt, yeah.
Oh, yeah, not a problem.
I asked the question.
So, well, there isn't that much more other than this to it.
This is
So you set up then your tasks as well. So the task is just the description, the expected output. And then you can tell it which agent would normally run it, though. Again, you're controlling that in Python by telling it which agent goes to which tasks, but getting it to output things in a consistent format is where I struggled often with. Like, because I wanted something to be in JSON, getting it to always give it in JSON and not give anything else, like, here is your JSON. Kept throwing it off because all I wanted was the JSON so that I could pull it and parse it.
Yeah.
And of course, once they add stuff. So that's where a lot of the playing and back and forth and like, will this work? And now fortunately, it's a small pipeline and it runs fairly fast, even on my slow computer. So, I mean, I could iterate fairly quickly, but if you had a large pipeline, you would want to break it into pieces and test each piece. Yeah, I didn't write any tests for this either. There's a whole testing module that you can use. So yeah, so you have the two YAML files, which are kind of the text descriptions of what you defined in your crew. And then there's a main file that kind of starts the whole thing running. So this, for example, is where I put in, I want to be able to enter the topic that I want information on. Or you could just define what the topic is, but I'm going to use that topic for the researcher. The researcher will output a product, which will then go to the analyst, who will clean it up and add at the end how many words they have in their cleaned up version. Yeah, and this part is all related to the coding things. I was trying to get it to do the coding task. So it's just if the task is coding, I was having it output all the code. And that's how I knew, like, it kept adding things to my JSON as I had it, put it into the code for me to see. So I guess I can run it. So let me pull up the terminal. Okay, so it's running it. You can see at the bottom. Here, I'll try to make that bigger. Ooh. topic do we want to explore? Any topics of interest? Something passed because again, this is Llama 3.2, came out like a year ago, so don't do anything
Research.
too.
Yeah.
It doesn't really matter. It's just to show what it does. How about something like the price of gas in relation to
Inflation.
inflation in the
Biggest source. of gas
2010s.
prices.
Let's see what it does. So now it starts running, so it tells you kind of what's going on. So it started with the crew, it's now given an agent the task.
Conduct a thorough research about it. I will go do that. Interesting.
So it's doing stuff. One thing that I haven't figured out, and there's probably a way, is like after it completes, you can't go back and read all of this. It's not outputting it into a file. I'm sure somewhere I could tell it to, but at the end, it just kind of gives me a summary.
Like, yes, let me do this research, but first I will pay really close attention to the word count. That's like objective number one. Write something and just count the words, please. Really need to keep track of that critical piece of information.
And I currently have it set to do 5 iterations on each one. You can set how many times it does self-improvement and stuff.
This is what.
And it runs a lot faster when you use ChatGPT through the API, obviously.
Yeah,
But it also costs, like I spent like $3 an hour, which is a lot of inference, but it's because it keeps going back for more and more and more. It's
oh
not-
man, it's making pie charts, going off the wrong direction here already.
So then, oh, maybe I still have the coder part in there. So we can go down then and
Looks like it tried
see,
to make some code, yeah.
so this is. So this is the report file. Let me make that smaller again. Once it's big, it's harder to tell what happened. Okay, so that's still in terminal. So let me shrink terminal now. So this is the report it wrote, downloaded report MD, like I told it. The price of gas has long been an important indicator of inflationary pressures. And that's its report on that.
Thanks.
And it has the word count, just like I hoped. Word count 396 words.
Yep.
So that part of the agent worked.
Oh, we got electric vehicles in it somehow.
Yeah, so that's it. That's kind of all it does, is you create them. Again, it's pretty easy. You define how many agents you want. You can have as many as you want. Then you describe them, and you describe the tasks, and then you assign the tasks to the agents and you hit run. And away it goes. And if you want to develop tools, you can just add a tool to it and then assign the tool to the agent, and the agent will use that tool. In this case, just to do something really simple, but you could have it do something more complex if you wanted to write more complex code. Eventually, my guess is it'll get much better at doing where it will write the code and then execute it. Because I think that would be really cool, like based on whatever the question was, figure out what type of data visualization best describes it,
Yeah,
then write code for that data visualization and then post it. And maybe if I use like ChatGPT, a better model, it would do all of that.
Mhm.
What it has to have, the problem that kept coming up is for the code interpreter to work, you can only feed it a JSON file. And it has to be in a certain format, and it just would not follow that format precisely enough that it would then crash everything out. But if you just ask it for the code, like, so this is one of them, so I did have it create visualization code. And it did a pretty nice job. It wrote how to create charts. The part that it never got right, but again, this was Llama, was that it would ask to pull the data from websites that didn't exist. Like it got the Fed Reserve part of the website right, but then the later parts, when you clicked it, you got a 404.
They might have existed last year.
I was gonna say, or 6 months ago.
Yeah, that is true. The
Three
data may
months
have been.
ago.
So in that
Ryan?
way, even if you don't run it to do that, at least you have the code. Yep,
I have a question. Can you hear me?
yep, I can hear you.
Okay, yeah, I'm just wondering, you have like you have a setup here where you have one agent is sort of seems like a supervisor or planner role, and the other one is sort of executing, or maybe they'd have defined roles. And I'm wondering, like, I'm trying to think of if you might be able to apply this to like simple coding tasks or like some sort of zero shot classification that you normally use, you know, fine tune an encoder model for. Like, could you have them, or like if you wanted to code a document or extract information on like a human rights violation, or if you wanted it to say whether a certain type of event occurred or not. And normally, like in the past, we would have just hired or may still want to have labeled data, you know, that we hire human coders to do that. I guess I'm wondering about the possibility of using this, you know, multi-agent prompting to get the models to debate with each other. Like, is there a way to set it up to
Oh,
have
definitely.
either generator and a critic or two models debating, and how would you do that?
Yeah, you could do it several ways. And people get really complex with some of these, but having a manager is fairly typical for a more complex task. So you have one who assigns the tasks and gets the feedback and checks that the output is the correct one before it goes to the next one. Here, I'm just passing it from one to the next without any check. But you could easily put a checker agent in who would check it, and then if it doesn't like it, would send it back and say, do it again, this isn't good enough. And they would be that judge. And you could have two agents to do the task, and they both send it to the checker agent, and the checker agent can decide which it likes better. Or you could have 50 agents all do the task, and it could do. And you could set it up kind of in any way you think, depending on what you want. And you can either have it do it native in the LLM, or you can have code that does it for you. So you could have some where it just checks it as the LLM. Others, it actually runs like a Python test code to see if the output is the correct output. So you could have different types of tests that it's doing to see whether or not you're getting the right answer that you want. So what's interesting though about that too is, so I was watching the video of OpenAI's release of their new model, and their new model does this in the background. It will actually, like if you ask it a math question, it will solve it like in 3 different ways, and then compare those results to see if it's the accurate result. And then it will tell you like all 3 of the ways and what the result is. So they kind of have, like JP was saying, they've started to build some of that logic into the models. Though that probably comes not into the model, that's probably in post-training is my guess. But as we experience it, it will feel like it's in the model. That's
what I was kind of getting at, is I think
Yeah.
I think the UI might not change, but in the background, it takes your question and realizes I can probably answer this better if I use some other agents, and it goes off and spins off agents and then comes back. It looks the same to us, but really a lot of stuff happened under the hood, and
which is what's currently happening with ChatGPT
Yeah,
anyway. It's not really
that is
one
what it's
model.
doing. Yeah.
It's, you're interacting with many models at the same time.
If I task that drone to go over there, then I can get a really good answer.
Yeah,
I kind of like the idea of having multiple agents do the task multiple times, or maybe even have them have different dispositions. You know, some may be more conservative, like if it's an evaluation task, some might be more conservative, some might be more, you know, liberal, or if like a grading task, some are harder graders, some are easier. And then you could have like a point estimate, right? And you could have a confidence interval for the, you know, for the evaluations, you know. And we actually have some measures like that of different things, including like a really commonly used democracy score by the VDEM Institute. They have like multiple human coders coding different countries, country experts, And then they take all of the codings over multiple years and they run a statistical measurement model to give a point estimate and a confidence interval for the democracy score for that country. So you can imagine doing something similar with these agents. I think that's super cool. That rather than just deciding on like which one do you like best, actually give the range of scores potentially.
Well, and I think you could go one step further, which is kind of what they've been working on at Stanford, which is to train agents that are more close to the people that you want. It's like, let's say you had 100 people who are currently doing this task. Could you give them, like, could you do a 2-hour interview with them and learn enough about them that if you give the transcript as the background for the agent would score similar to how they have traditionally scored. And then you can move that ahead going forward, saying, if these same 100 people scored it, I now have 100 agents that replicate them. And they can score next year's rather than having the people do it. Or the people could supplement. It could do the general score and the people could fine tune it if you wanted to keep people in the loop. For various reasons, you probably might. But yeah, in theory, you could probably build agents that replicate the human fairly easily. Because there probably aren't that many data points about them that are that unique. And if they've been scoring for a while, you have a lot of data to compare against to say, like, we trained it, and now look at, you've done it for 20 years, and it got all 20 of them pretty much right what you did. So most likely it'll get 21 again.
So then does
then
that
you have the outlier.
introduce like a fine tuning process on top of this multi-agent process here? I mean, how is Stanford accomplishing
Well,
that?
Stanford was doing it, they're fine tuning models, but you could just do it in agent descriptions, I would think. I'm not sure what the limit is on how much text you can have with. I assume it's unlimited, but I don't know. But yeah, you could just figure out what is the language that describes agent 1 as being you. And agent 2 is David, agent 3 is Cindy. And then now you have 3 agents that behave like the 3 people you want them to behave like. And you give them enough information about the task that it knows. And then you could test against to see how close does it get. And slowly we put all ourselves out of jobs. Not so slowly even, as we start to figure this out, like,
I think what is enough is the tricky thing here. Like, how do you know the background information you give them is enough so that the agent can perform well this time and also next year and the future?
well, and that's where you may keep the human in the loop, is like the agent score might be 70% of the final score, and the human score is 30, but the human doesn't have to read all 100 pages anymore. And you're lightening the load on the human. They're looking for outliers, changes, deltas, rather than having to begin the task anew each year. But again, I don't know the context of this democracy thing, but I'm just thinking off the top of my head that, again, it might not replace the human, but it might change what the human does and allow the human to do things that maybe there wasn't enough cognitive load to do if they had to do everything else at the same time. If the LLM can take some of that cognitive load, then your human might be able to give you better attention to the things that are changing rather than the things that are static. Let the LLM deal with the static stuff.
Ryan, I have a question about cost. So like deep research from OpenAI is pretty costly if you're on plus the limit on number, how many deep research tasks you can get every month. And then by using this Crew AI framework, do you see it as a way to, bring down the cost? Because then you're training your own agent and they're just sending regular API calls.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess it would depend on the task. So I've tried the deep research with OpenAI. I've used like 2 of my 10 a month type thing. I didn't find it all that helpful. it was interesting, and I'm glad they're doing it. But it wasn't specific enough to the things that I'm interested in. So I think this has, well, it has the cost advantage. But then it has the advantage of, you can really drill down to make it specific to the types of questions you ask. For theirs, they had to keep it so general because an economist is asked a very different question than I am as an ed technologist, which is very different than what JP's gonna ask about research on EVs, which is, so they had to keep it so general that it struggles to get into. But this, you could really nail it down for your topic area and give it resources that are specific to what you do. And it's fairly simple. I mean, it's like a weekend worth of work to get something up and running. It's not like months and years and the framework, again, it's just really the 4 files that you play with. Unless you want to get into more complicated things. Yeah, the main thing that the main file does, it tells the order in which things are going to happen in it as well. So if you try different pipelines, you can edit that main file, but there isn't even that much to edit in there.
Could you run this on Pegasus or HPC?
Yeah, that's my plan, to run with better models and faster. Like I have DeepSeek on my computer, but it is so slow. You could tell even with 3.2, it was pretty slow. But I didn't have to be connected or anything. I could sit on the train and do it with my own computer. And there is something nice about running your own models on your own machine, not sending data anywhere, but HPC is pretty similar. Yeah, that's what I would do next is put it on HPC, and then I'd probably put in like a Mistral 15 billion parameter model and get much better results. I mean, this is a very small model and fairly old at this point. Yeah, I think there's a Llama 4 model even now, so I could probably get it.
Ryan, would you mind showing in the script where you pass the information from one agent to the other?
So for let me see. Okay, so pools, propose. Where was that I had the inputs? Is that in the main?
Maybe in the agents.
Oh, no, I had done it in the tasks. So that, yeah, you do it in the task because it's not dependent on the agent. I could repurpose this task with a different agent then. But
In
I
the
have
test at
task
YAML?
inputs. In the tasks area within Crew. Can you see that? So my task is the reporting task, and it has an output and an input.
I see. Okay. Yeah. Okay, thanks.
And sorry if you talked about this already. In Crew, they're talking about you in the free plan, you get 50 executions. Do you know what like an execution comprises?
No.
Okay.
So, yeah, they have services they sell on top and stuff like that. And this is just one framework. There are probably 24 out there, but this is the one that made the most sense to me. Like I also tried Hugging Face has small agents, which is kind of similar, but that was originally what I thought I would demo. And then I was trying to figure out how to demo it, and it got really confusing. Whereas this has a very simple logic with crews and agents and tasks within the crew. But I actually haven't rolled out a project. Now for one of the data science capstone projects, they're working with someone in public health, and they're using it because their project is to have multiple agents representing different health professions. So like a physician assistant, a nurse, a public health practitioner, a social worker, and people have conversations with differing combinations of those to learn how to do treatment care with multiple inputs from different perspectives. And they're using it too. They're using Crew AI. And they said it seems to be working well for that. So that's all I had. I'm happy to answer more questions or again, so next week we'll have a conversation on open source. Do you know what is the topic? Just in general, how to get involved with open source and all cool things. So, and then that will be it for coders for the spring. It will kick off again in the fall. And David, JP, and I will figure out when that's going to happen, the times, the dates, all of that, as we know our schedules.
Great presentation.